Niceness is usually praised as moral maturity, but it often begins as a survival strategy learned before you could question its cost. You were taught that being agreeable keeps you safe, loved, and included, yet something about that bargain was quietly left unexplained. In adulthood, this lesson doesn't disappear. It hardens into a personality that smiles automatically while tracking every unspoken slight. What looks like kindness on the surface often conceals a constant internal negotiation between fear of loss and buried resentment. The trap is subtle because it rewards you immediately, even as it charges interest. You won't notice for years. People call you easygoing, reliable, mature, words that feel like compliments until you realize they describe usefulness more than understanding. You learn to read rooms, soften truths, and preempt conflict, mistaking emotional camouflage for emotional intelligence. Underneath, anger doesn't vanish. It compresses, becoming quieter, sharper, and harder to recognize as your own. This is not a personal flaw. It is a predictable outcome of how humans adapted to survive inside groups. Long before modern workplaces and relationships, approval meant protection, and disapproval often meant isolation or death. Your nervous system still treats social rejection as a physical threat, even when the stakes are only emotional discomfort. So you stay pleasant, accommodating, and quiet, believing restraint equals safety, while something inside you keeps score. Every swallowed opinion becomes a small debt, invisible in the moment, accumulating in the background of your identity. You may even feel morally superior, confusing self-denial with virtue, unaware of the tension quietly reshaping your inner world. The illusion works because it looks peaceful, but peace achieved through suppression is structurally unstable. At some point, the body notices what the mind avoids, translating unexpressed anger into fatigue, irritability, or numbness. You might wonder why patience feels heavier with age, why kindness no longer feels light. This story isn't about becoming cruel. It's about noticing the quiet trade you've been making. Niceness promised belonging, yet it often delivers a muted life where anger survives underground silently. Before understanding how this happens, it helps to see the mechanism hiding beneath your good intentions. What you call personality is often a set of reflexes trained by earlier environments you no longer inhabit. Those reflexes were once adaptive, rewarded by safety signals that felt like warmth and approval. In the present, they persist automatically, firing before reflection has time to intervene fully consciously. The discomfort you sense is not mystery. It is feedback from an ancient system misreading modern situations. Ignoring that feedback feels easier than challenging an identity built on being agreeable for years. Yet the unease remains, waiting, because suppressed signals do not disappear. They wait for interpretation. What follows is not self-help, but anatomy, a slow look at how the pattern actually works. To see it clearly, the machinery beneath niceness needs to be exposed without comfort filters. The mechanism behind chronic niceness begins in early dependency, when survival required attunement to others rather than assertion of self. As a child, displeasing caregivers risked withdrawal of care, so compliance became linked to safety inside the nervous system. Your brain learned patterns before language, storing approval as relief and conflict as danger needing avoidance. This conditioning does not vanish with age. It becomes automated, running quietly beneath adult reasoning and self-image. Evolution favored humans who could remain inside the group, even at the cost of personal expression. Groups provided protection, resources, and mating opportunities, while isolation increased vulnerability to predators and starvation. So the brain evolved to prioritize social harmony over internal truth, especially when power dynamics felt unequal. Niceness, then, is not moral insight, but a regulatory behavior designed to reduce perceived social threat. Each time you smooth tension or silence disagreement, your nervous system receives a signal of temporary safety. That relief reinforces the behavior, even when the situation no longer carries real survival consequences. Modern environments confuse this ancient system because emotional disagreement rarely equals physical danger anymore. Still, your body responds as if exclusion could cost you everything, triggering appeasement automatically. Anger, in contrast, evolved as a boundary signal, preparing the organism to protect territory or status. When anger is consistently suppressed, the signal does not disappear. It loses clarity and direction. Instead of guiding action, it becomes internal pressure without an obvious outlet. Social conditioning intensifies this process by rewarding politeness while subtly punishing assertiveness, especially in hierarchical systems. Workplaces, families, and communities often prefer predictability over honesty, reinforcing agreeable behavior as maturity. You learn that expressing dissatisfaction risks being labeled difficult, ungrateful, or emotionally immature. So you adapt by internalizing conflict, believing restraint proves emotional control rather than fear. Over time, the brain associates self-expression with risk and suppression with stability. This association becomes part of identity, something you describe as just how you are. Yet identity formed around avoidance requires constant monitoring of others' reactions to maintain equilibrium. That vigilance consumes cognitive energy, leaving less capacity for self-awareness and genuine connection. Because anger remains unacknowledged, it seeks alternative channels of expression. It leaks through sarcasm, chronic irritation, passive resistance, or sudden emotional withdrawal. These behaviors confuse others because they appear disproportionate or disconnected from any obvious cause. From the outside, you seem calm. Internally, tension cycles without resolution. The brain interprets unresolved anger as unfinished business, keeping the stress response partially active. This low-grade activation becomes familiar, eventually mistaken for normal adulthood pressure. What feels like personality is often physiology repeating learned strategies beyond their usefulness. The mechanism persists, not because it works well, but because it once worked well enough. Understanding. This is not about blame. It is about seeing cause beneath character. The same system that helped you belong now quietly erodes clarity about what you actually feel. And when feelings remain unclear, choices follow patterns rather than intention. The cost of this pattern does not arrive dramatically. It accumulates slowly and privately. To understand that cost, attention must shift from origins to consequences. That is where niceness begins to reveal its long shadow. The consequences of chronic niceness rarely announce themselves. They seep into life as subtle distortions of identity and desire. You begin to lose track of what you actually want because preference was never prioritized over acceptance. Decisions feel oddly draining, not because options are complex, but because your internal signals are muted. When anger is ignored long enough, it stops presenting as emotion and starts presenting as mood. You may describe yourself as tired, cynical, or detached without linking those states to suppressed boundaries. Relationships slowly reorganize around your compliance, training others to expect accommodation without negotiation. Resentment grows, not because others are cruel, but because unspoken contracts keep being violated silently. Each time you say yes while meaning no, the self fractures slightly, though nothing appears broken externally. Over years, this fracture creates a gap between how you are perceived and how you experience yourself. Being seen as kind but not known produces a particular loneliness that is difficult to articulate. You might feel surrounded, yet internally isolated, present but not fully participating in your own life. Anger, deprived of expression, often turns inward, reshaping self-perception subtly and persistently. Self-criticism replaces external conflict because blame feels safer when it has no social consequences. You may judge yourself for feeling dissatisfied, believing gratitude should cancel discomfort. This internalized policing keeps the system stable while deepening emotional stagnation. Over time, motivation erodes, not from laziness, but from the absence of authentic agency. Goals pursued to maintain harmony feel hollow once achieved, offering relief rather than fulfillment. Pleasure becomes muted because it requires contact with desire, and desire risks disapproval. Even anger loses sharpness, becoming a background hum instead of a clear signal. This makes boundaries difficult to detect, let alone defend, reinforcing the original pattern. Stress accumulates because unresolved emotions demand processing energy indefinitely. The body carries this load quietly, translating it into tension, headaches, digestive issues, or sleep disruption. Nothing feels catastrophic, yet nothing feels fully alive either. The danger lies not in explosion, but in slow emotional calcification. You become reliable, reasonable, and increasingly distant from spontaneous feeling. Others may trust you deeply while never truly encountering you. This creates a strange contradiction: high social acceptance paired with low self-recognition. Because the cost is invisible, it is easy to dismiss as normal adulthood compromise. But what is normalized is not always healthy. It is often just widespread. The longer this pattern runs, the harder it becomes to locate its origin. Anger feels foreign, even threatening, despite being a natural regulatory emotion. Without anger, there is no clear signal of violation, only diffuse dissatisfaction. That dissatisfaction becomes the emotional background of daily life. You function well enough, yet something essential feels postponed indefinitely. This is the quiet damage niceness inflicts, not chaos, but erosion. To notice it requires attention rather than action, recognition rather than repair. That recognition is where the final layer begins. Recognition begins when you stop asking whether niceness is good and start asking what it has been protecting you from. Not from harm necessarily, but from sensations your nervous system still labels as dangerous. Disapproval, tension, and disappointment feel threatening because they once were linked to loss of safety. So your body reacts before your thoughts can catch up, choosing appeasement without consultation. Seeing this does not require changing behavior. It requires noticing the impulse as it happens. The tightening in your chest before you agree, the pause before you speak honestly, the familiar swallowing of response. These moments are not moral failures. They are ancient reflexes misfiring in a different environment. You may notice how quickly your mind justifies silence, calling it maturity, patience, or emotional intelligence. Those explanations arrive after the fact, smoothing over a decision already made by the body. Recognition strips those explanations of their authority without replacing them with instructions. It reveals that much of what you call choice is choreography rehearsed long ago. You might also notice how anger appears only when it feels safe, leaking out sideways rather than forward. Irritation at small things, withdrawal instead of confrontation, humor that carries a quiet edge. These are not random traits. They are rerouted signals seeking expression without risk. When you see this clearly, the narrative of being naturally nice begins to loosen. Not because you become different, but because the story explaining your behavior loses certainty. You may realize how often you confuse being needed with being valued, usefulness with connection. That confusion keeps you present in others' lives while absent from your own internal landscape. Recognition also reveals why rest rarely feels restorative. Vigilance never truly stands down. A nervous system trained to monitor approval cannot relax into stillness easily. This is not something to fix, only something to understand without self-deception. Understanding does not dissolve the pattern immediately. It changes your relationship to it. You begin to see anger not as a flaw, but as information that, when untranslated, you see niceness not as virtue, but as a language learned under pressure. The unsettling part is not that you are conditioned, but that the conditioning still decides for you. Most of what you protect by being nice no longer exists in the way your body believes. Yet the system persists, loyal to a past context, indifferent to present reality. This awareness does not offer comfort, it offers clarity. And clarity can feel like exposure because there is no one left to blame. What remains is the quiet recognition that much of your anger was never dangerous. It was simply inconvenient to a system built for survival, not truth. The final observation is simple and uncomfortable. You were never too nice. You were adapting to a threat that quietly moved on without telling your nervous system.